Hey guys, my name is Neel and welcome to Neel Workshop Zone. So in this episode we're going to be talking about data types. So in the previous episodes we talked about a lot of things like arrays, scopes, etc. So if you haven't checked it out, I recommend checking out those episodes because watching those episodes will help you to understand this episode a lot more better. So in this episode we're going to be learning about data types. Now before we talk about data types, one important key detail to remember is that data types are commonly used in a lot more other programming languages like Java and Python, etc. So if you do have some knowledge regarding Java and Python, then in JavaScript terms, a data type is basically the same thing. But if you're a complete beginner with no experience to any other programming languages and you are just starting JavaScript like right now, then yeah, let me tell you about data types. So data types, as the name suggests, it's basically types of data that you use in your code so that your code doesn't get too complicated or too congested. And I know it might sound confusing, but let me throw a simple question. Let us assume that we have written a code where it says something like let x is equals to let's see, car plus 7. Now what do you think the computer will do? Will it show an error or will it do or give a response? Let us even write 7 plus 2. Let us write something like this. Let us assume that we have written something like let x is equals to car plus 7 plus 2. Now what will the program do? And this is why these type of problems are the reason why data types exist, so that we can better understand and how this JavaScript program works and how we can use data types to our advantage in the code. So we'll put this problem aside, and after discussing about some of the data types over here, we can come back to it. So first of all, the thing that we need to know is that data types are divided into 8 main data types, sub-data types. So you have strings, you have numbers, you have objects, you have boolean, you have symbol, undefined, null, and we also have begin. So let's talk about strings. So strings are basically a set of characters, letters, as you can say, to put it in simpler terms. So for example, something like JavaScript or Neel Workshop Zone, or a group of words, that is what you can call it as strings, basically letters. Next you have numbers, which is pretty self-explanatory. Numbers are just numbers, 2, 3, 1, etc. And next you have big int. Now this might sound complicated, big int, but big int is pretty easy. Basically, towards the recent updates on JavaScript, they realized that JavaScript can be used to make much more complex mathematical processes. So in that cases, sometimes we need to use numbers which are really complex and really long. So you can't really store those numbers in a variable, so that it gets a little bit more complicated and even hard for the JavaScript program to run the code. So that is why they introduced something known as begin. So when let begin is equals to a number, in that case what it becomes is that the program itself understands that begin is basically used to define a really long number. So for example, if I write something like 10712345983.2641793, so on. In that case, you can define it in begin so that it doesn't really become a problem. And next you have null, which as the name suggests, we have talked about it in my previous episode. That's the reason I said if you haven't checked that out, then I can check both those episodes. But we have talked about null and undefined, which are basically what happens when you basically define a variable but you don't really write some value in it. So in that case, it stays undefined. You have symbols, which are basically symbols like dollar symbols, underscores, semicolons, columns, etc. Next you have boolean. Now some people might have heard of boolean, but some people might not have. But boolean is basically true or false. And this is important and really useful when you're working on loops or something related to that. So for example, if you're writing a code regarding true or false, you can't just write everything such as like, if this happens then print true, and if this happens then print false. Instead of that, you can directly use boolean to write the code, which we will talk about in the previous episode because it deserves its own episode. But that is basically boolean. It includes true or false. And next we have objects. Again, objects is something we'll talk about in the future episode, but to put it simply without much bigger definition, objects are basically code in JavaScript that also has properties. So I know it's a little confusing, but when we get back to it after a lot more stuff, it'll be much more easy to understand. So objects contain a lot of stuff. Well, mainly three. Objects can contain objects, it can contain date or time, and can also contain arrays. Now we have talked about arrays in the previous episode, and date or time is pretty self-explanatory, and objects will get into that in the future. But we can use all of this, and the reason why we can use all of this is because of data types. So that is why data type is important. So when writing some code, it is really helpful because it is basically one of the building blocks for writing code. So now let's get back to the question, shall we? So I have proposed the question where let x is equal to car plus 7 plus 2. So you might be confused on what might happen when this is done. So let me just write this over here. Car plus 7 plus 2. What do you think might have happened? Well, JavaScript basically works from the left to right. And when you write a code in this order, what JavaScript takes it as is that it reads the first part of the question and realizes that car is a string. So what it immediately does is instead of considering these as numbers, it will consider them as strings, and your output will be car 7 2, because it takes these numbers as strings because that is the first data type that the code has run or the code has looked upon. So that is why we can say that the answer is car 7 2. So now you might be getting a doubt that what would happen if we reverse the numbers and we add car to the last. Well, in that case the answer will be different. So if I write the same question, car plus 7 plus 2, the answer, so car, okay, there has been a little glitch. When we're writing code that says 2 plus 7 plus car, what happens is this time instead of taking the first data type as string, it will take it as variable. So what will happen is it will take this, this and this as variables. So it will take 9 car. So that is basically what happens when you're writing on code regarding, data types. So yeah, that is basically about data types. It's a short episode, but it's a really important one because we learned about different types of data types, and this data types concept might seem simple and insignificant, realizing that I've dedicated an entire episode to this. But without this, we cannot write JavaScript code. We'll get to understand more about it as we talk in the future episodes. But yeah, this is basically about JavaScript. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out any new videos. And that's all folks, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.